Okay, hi again. I'm Leslie Sultan, estate planning attorney. Quick disclaimer, we are going to be talking about some legal stuff, but everything said here is just for informational purposes. It does not create an attorney-client privilege or should not constitute legal advice. If you needed a situation and you needed a consultation with an attorney, we would recommend that you consult directly with someone and not consider anything said here as legal advice. All right, so thank you, and thank you all for joining us. And Sandrine, go ahead.
Okay. So I'm gonna have some questions that I basically created. But if anyone has any questions, we're more than happy to have you ask them. So you could definitely put them in the chat, and then we can allow for a few minutes at the end to just address those questions, especially if they weren't highlighted here. So I'm gonna dive right in and asking Leslie, what is guardianship, Leslie?
Yeah, so good question. So in New York, we call it guardianship. In some other states, they call it conservatorship. So in case any of you are in another state, um, but they are referring to the same thing. So it's a legal court proceeding to acknowledge that somebody has lacks capacity and that someone else needs to be appointed to make decisions for them. There are two types in New York. There's Article 81, which is fundamental health law for people who become disabled, usually through Alzheimer, dementia, traumatic brain injuries, etc. There's also Article 17, which is for people who are born with, uh, oh gosh, I'm blanking on the word, but people who are born with cognitive disabilities and, they're Down syndrome, autism spectrum, that they're just, and once they as their children, the parents are entitled to make decisions for them, but once they become 18, they're technically an adult and a guardianship proceeding has to be held for them. But that is a much stricter guardianship. They lose all powers like forever. So we're not really going to be talking about those because we assume that you're listening based on an aging parent who had capacity and may or may not be losing it, and so how to protect them, and that would be the Article 81 guardianship.
So, does a person or a family member have the choice on who they want to choose as a guardian in the event that I guess it's kind of a twofold question. So, let's say, I, I have I have my father and I'm interested in guardianship. Can I just say like, hey, can I get guardianship for my dad?
Right. So technically anybody can petition for a guardian to be appointed. And then they can petition either for themselves to be appointed or for the court to appoint somebody. Um, if you Google guardianship New York, you will probably read some nightmare horror stories because for someone to be qualified as a guardian, there's really very little formal training. They have to attend like a 6-hour training and then they're certified and they can manage somebody's life and money and everything. So ideally, the person applying, petitioning for guardianship is the loving, caring daughter. But we've seen cases where there's no family and a nursing home has to petition in order to make sure that they're getting paid and or apply for Medicaid applications. And I'm just gonna mute everyone, or ask everybody to mute if you can, please. Um, Hang on, I haven't done this in a while. Okay, why can't I figure out how to, okay, maybe through participants? No, how do I mute people?
I, I think because you're the host, you can, right?
Um,
If you click on that person.
oh yeah, you're right. Thanks. Okay,
Yeah. Okay. Oh,
got it.
perfect. Okay. So, because one of the things that I come across, so I obviously am in the field and I see adults many of whom are disabled. And at times I will have situations where I feel like this is why I was thinking it's like kind of a twofold question. So I'll have someone who might have concerns of like a potential need for guardianship later in the future, or there's some concerning issues happening where maybe there's concern of financial exploitation. That's usually a big one
Mhm.
that comes up for me. And someone asks about guardianship.
I'm sorry, what was there a question there?
So
Okay.
is it like, can it be a situation where someone can prepare for guardianship? Because oddly enough, I feel like I've gotten this question from families, and I'll say, well, almost like they're questioning the person's capacity, and I'll always say, you can't, like, or even I can't determine someone's capacity. That has to go through the court system, the legal system, and
Mhm.
it's the whole thing. But a lot of times I feel like I'm in positions where I'm asked as a social worker to determine this person's capacity and whether or not they would be a candidate for guardianship. Is that something that people can just, I guess my question is, let's say I'm that daughter looking out for her dad, and I question and I basically want him to be basically I'm anticipating some sort of future issue.
Right. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. So ideally, everybody, okay, once you turn 18, again, you have autonomy. Nobody can make decisions for you. We're signing a power of attorney document. And a power of attorney is saying, I'm a principal of I make my own decisions, but I'm electing that if I need it, this person can make decisions for me. So that's never done. I mean, that's ideal, right? But most people aren't at 18 celebrating their birthday and signing a power of attorney form. The next ideal is like, my mom, for example, suffers from dementia. Or years ago, she saw a doctor and he said, you're having, I think they called it cognitive impairment.
Right.
And so she made sure to have all her documents. Just because you have dementia doesn't necessarily mean you do have an incapacity, right? So she might not know what year it is, and she doesn't, but she knows who I am. She knows that she would want me to help her. So, depending on where the person is in that scale, ideally they would prevent it by signing a power of attorney. If they sign a power of attorney, then the power of attorney agent can do what a guardian would do,
Right.
except without all the court process. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer from a legal perspective. You fill out a power of attorney form, it's a 10-page, 15-page document, sign it, notarize it, done, maybe cost you a couple $100 and a half an hour of your time, versus guardianship, which costs thousands of dollars, attorneys, it could take up to a year. It's a huge invasion of privacy. People are coming to the house. I mean, it sucks. And if you're
Yeah.
famous, it's all over the news.
Yeah, like we see now, obviously. And that's where I, like, again, there's this struggle that I have with families, and I'm like, listen, I always have this conversation, and even with my patients, I tell them, look, you need to speak to an estate planning attorney, an elder care planning attorney. That way you can have all of these things in order. Just because you're saying, oh, this person doesn't have capacity, or I feel that they don't, like, no, it doesn't work that
Right.
way. You
Yeah.
have to go through the courts and all this stuff. But anyway, I highly recommend people see an estate planning attorney. And like you mentioned, like something like doing a power of attorney could maybe be an opportunity to avoid, hopefully, a situation like Wendy Williams.
Right.
Again, we don't know the legalities of that, but we would hope doing something like that would prevent that, right?
Right.
And
And Mhm.
go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just saying, and we were talking earlier that it's possible that she did do a power of attorney at some point because she was married,
Right.
and presumably she did it, but once she got divorced, that power of attorney would have been revoked. And if the timing, because divorces take so long, if she was already having capacity issues at the time that it was revoked, then she doesn't have the power to reappoint someone.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you for clarifying that, because it's so
Yeah.
confusing.
Yeah.
I feel like you touched on this earlier, and I actually took notes, especially because we're obviously for this conversation we're talking about Article 81, when it comes to the I guess the types of guardianship. So, in your experience, what are some scenarios that you find that appointing a guardian is necessary in an adult person? And I think we kind of answered that, but can you just answer that question? Just giving,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I
So
think I can too.
yeah. I'll say, and then you can talk about your experiences because
Yeah.
you've seen them too. I mean, you're super involved in the field, but certainly when someone's in a nursing home, especially if they didn't sign a healthcare proxy, which is another like no-brainer, like let's just sign this document, it's quick, easy. Um, but yeah, I mean, once somebody, I mean, we have one where there's a lot of informal stuff. Like I said, we're applying for 81. Actually, New York is also trying to do away with the 17 guardianships, so they're focusing more on the 81s because I have a client now. They're functional autism, but
Mhm,
dad was always taking care of them. Then
mhm,
dad passed away.
mhm.
Now son is supposed to inherit all this money, but with his type of autism, he has no like sense of consequences, and he's being scammed all left and right, and he needs someone. So in that case, there can also be guardianship of the person and
Mm,
guardianship of the property. So
mm,
someone to decide where he's going to live. Is he going to live in the father's apartment? Is he going to be relocated to a group home? And then someone who's going to spend the money for his bills. So,
right,
um, that's a situation where you can see where if someone's not able to take care of themselves, bathe, obviously that they need a guardian of the person. And then if they're not able to spend money, you need a guardian of the property.
right, right, right. That makes complete sense. In my experience, it's always about money. It's normally a guardian is appointed because there's some sort of concern or some issue that has happened related to financial exploitation. And a huge thing that I feel like is not really talked about, but we see a lot in the field is that family members tend to be the biggest offenders when it comes to financial exploitation. And it's unfortunate, but it does happen. But you
Yeah.
know, and it's always concerning when we're questioning whether or not that person has capacity. So again, I feel like having certain documents in place is so important, especially having conversations with someone that you trust with your finances for when, if and when that situation ever does come up, I think would help so much. Fortunately, I'm not in a situation where I see people on an ongoing basis. It's just a few visits and then I'm out. But it's always when I come across some sort of guardianship involvement, I'm usually told that it was because of financial exploitation from someone in the family. So
Hmm.
it's happened more than we like to talk about or think about.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah,
for any listeners, this if this feels like something that could affect your family, that's where you definitely want to speak to someone, see if you can get mom or dad to sign a power of attorney. Um, or start putting some steps into place. I mean, I've seen like mom signs power of attorney over here and then gives it to someone else over here and then goes back and forth. So sometimes that might be the process, but then you can use that for as evidence for the guardianship too, that they're being manipulated. And
right.
yeah, I mean, it's not a good place to be in. But you want to do the best you can to protect that loved one.
Yeah.
And don't play around and download the forms online. I mean, unfortunately, I had a case where, you know, nephew was helping the uncle. He lived in California. He downloaded the New York power of attorney. He claims that he had someone even approve it for him. It was the wrong form. And then uncle went into a nursing home. Nephew needed to sell the house to pay for the nursing home, and the title company would not acknowledge the power of
Wow.
attorney. And so
Mm,
after doing all of that, guardianship because he had to get
yeah.
the proper documents. So, I mean, he tried, but he just he got to go directly to a guardian, an attorney, unfortunately, because it just wasn't done right. And I've seen that happen many times with the wrong form or the sign in
Right.
the wrong place. So,
And you see, and actually that brings us to our next question, which I feel like we kind of addressed, but not specifically. But is there ever scenarios where you can avoid a court appointed guardian. Like, let's say the person really would benefit from a guardian. Is there a way that a family member can petition and hopefully be granted that ability to be that guardian?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think the court prefers it to be a family member as long as there's no accusations of,
Okay.
harm. But yeah, because having a third person, I mean, there's only so many people that agree to act as guardians, and there's tons of cases, and we've all heard those like terrible stories. So the court is going to prefer, a family member or family friend petitioning because they
Mhm.
know the needs better. They know the person better. The alleged incapacitated person presumably is going to be more comfortable with that than some stranger coming in and controlling the money. So,
Right, right, right. It's so interesting. That's good to know. Good.
yeah.
Um, what are some estate planning hacks that may be beneficial to our audience to help them to avoid having to go through the legal process of guardianship? Again, I feel like we address this, but again, just to reiterate.
Yeah, right. No, again, signing power of attorney, healthcare proxy. I mean, those are the only legal tools we have for this, but those are the most effective. And once you have that power of attorney, you'd file it with the bank right away. So that's like a record, right? So the in case the power of attorney gets lost, um, at least there's it's on file with a bank or a formal institution. And the healthcare proxies should be um, filed with the hospitals or the doctor's offices. And then don't put those documents in like a safe deposit box that could be locked from. Make their we tell our clients to put their important documents in a fire safe bag and
Mm,
in a closet or something that's not lockable that could potentially lock someone out when they need it.
right.
And don't do the
Okay.
safety deposit box. I hear
Don't
people say that all the
don't
time.
do
Don't put
the
your legal documents in a safety
oh,
deposit box.
okay, that makes sense because who has the key?
Yeah, and if anything, yeah, you can't get access unless you're named, and then if someone dies,
Right.
forget about it. You have to go to court to get into the
Dang.
box. It's a big problem.
Well, I have a good story. So a couple years ago, so my mom has been going to the same bank forever. Like they know her, they know me, like and that's rare these days. I mean, really, because no one goes to the bank anymore. So they actually said to her, "Can you give us? Do you have a power of attorney?" And my mom was like, "Yeah, I think so." And they asked her for a copy of it. Now that makes sense. I
Mm,
never realized why they wanted it, but I was fine to give it to them. But I thought that was a good idea, and then you just mentioned it. So now I'm going to tell my clients, like, if you have that power of attorney, make sure you file it with the bank, your bank.
yeah, because looking for it when you need it, forget it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah,
Very, very good tip. Very good tip.
thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Um, And typically, what are the costs of guardianship? Like, if you could give us a ballpark, I know you kind of said it before, but like typically, how much does it cost, and who is actually responsible? Because that's another thing I feel like people are uncertain about.
Yeah, so I mean, so if you're gonna do power of attorney healthcare documents, I mean, you could pay like we charge 750 for like a healthcare package, and that we give all our clients that everything's signed within 10 minutes and it's done. So that's the best way to go. Guardianship though is litigation, right? You generally want to hire an attorney. I mean, I will be honest, you can go down and file it pro se. So by yourself. But most people that I talk to are hiring an attorney. And we take a $5,000 retainer and we bill at an hourly rate of 450 an hour. So, there you could shop around in theory and talk to other attorneys. Obviously, you want to make sure you got an attorney who knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
Don't go to a real estate attorney to file a guardianship proceeding. Um, and there's filing fees with the court. It's probably about $400 to $500 in filing fees with the court.
Mhm.
Um, and then depending on the person, you might be able to get reimbursed, right? So if daughter's paying for the guardianship, but mom has money, they could get appointed guardian and then reimburse. Um, And then if a guardian is appointed, like a third party, they're gonna look to the person to pay whatever
Mhm.
accounts they have.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
we definitely want to compensate the guardian because otherwise, they're gonna neglect you if they're not getting paid for their time. This isn't a volunteer job.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I mean, in some cases, there's guardianship funds that the courts can draw from.
Mm.
Um, and then, typical scenario is like these nursing homes are applying for people who have no money and are in the nursing home. They'll apply to Medicaid, and then Medicaid will then pay their bills. And so, they just have attorneys that bang out those applications all day long.
Right. Right. Yeah. Totally makes sense. So we actually have a question that was emailed to us. So I'm gonna ask that one. And then after this, if anyone has any questions, please definitely speak up or put them in the chat. That's fine. What is the difference between guardianship and conservatorship?
Yeah, great. So they're the same. There's just different words depending on the state. So, but ultimately here in New York, a guardianship is what like California calls a conservatorship. But New York used to call it conservatorship years ago, and they've adopted the word guardianship instead. Um, and just the same way the courts are starting to transition away as much as possible from the 17A guardianships and into the 81
Mhm.
Article 81s, maybe there's going to be a shift there in the law. But as of now, New York, we call it guardianship.
Right, right, right. Okay. That clarifies it.
Yeah.
Because I wondered that question too.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Mhm.
Yes, I don't see any questions in the chat. So if people wanted to go ahead and unmute themselves or put it in the chat. In the meantime, I don't know. Sandrine, do you want to put your email address in case people have
Oh
questions
yeah.
directly to
Sure,
you?
sure.
Okay.
I can. Yes. I'll put
And
my
I'll
email
put
in the
mine in.
chat if anyone has questions for me. How do I? It says I can only send it to you, I think. Let's see.
Hmm. I can put yours in if you need me to.
Yeah, I don't know why. It's just letting me. Oh, I think because we're recording or something, maybe. I'm getting a pop-up because we're recording.
Oh, okay. Maybe I'll turn the
Okay.
recording off. I don't think we need to record the
Oh
question.
yeah. Okay.
All right. I put my email in the chat in case anybody has questions after the meeting, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop the recording now.